Next, we have a panel that will be talking about disruption in higher education, and there'll be 4 people on the panel. We'll have first Doug Lederman, who is editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Education. He'll be our moderator. Anna Marie Kelsey, president of University of Washington. Beverly Davenport, Chancellor, University of Tennessee. And Bob Custer, president of Boise State University. Me, right, I think. And me. But first, we'll have Doug Lederman, who is editor and co-founder Inside Higher Education. Doug?
Thanks. There we go. Great to be here. I'm really honored to be up here with these 4 really thoughtful public research university leaders. I'm tempted to completely change the order of things and ask them all about Regina's talk, but maybe I'll save that so they all have a few minutes to think about it. So the panel, the session here is talk. The title is Navigating, Innovating, and Excelling. And I know that the leaders up here, like all of you, would probably like to spend much more of their time focusing on the latter 2, innovating and excelling, than on navigating, which often feels like playing defense instead of being aggressively pursuing their goals. Today, what we're going to talk about today is about how institutions are, despite an environment that, per that video at the beginning, is pretty challenging. How institutions, how they're sort of driving their institutions forward, their institutions and your institutions, to pursuing their goals, and excelling despite an increasingly intrusive political class and an increasingly skeptical public. So I'm going to start right in with a sort of a timely question, given some of the recent activity in this town, which is in the last week or so, we've had tax bills introduced by both houses of Congress that would in various ways harm public and private colleges and college students and would-be college students. And it's tempting to see the willingness to eliminate tax breaks for college going and for institutions as a signal or a sign of as the latest evidence of the political skepticism which we've seen in recent national polling. It also may just be evidence of the politicians' desperate attempts to try and find revenue to offset some of their other goals, including tax cuts. So I guess I'd want to start with sort of for all of you with a question of, how much do you see the tax bills as evidence of singling out higher education or going after higher education in some fundamental way? And more significantly, how do you view how much do you buy into the idea that we are seeing declining public confidence? We had a call earlier, and a couple of the presidents sort of questioned how much they're seeing the public skepticism locally. So I guess I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of both of those things. The tax bill as evidence of public skepticism, and then more broadly, how do you sort of view some of the polling we've seen from Gallup and Pew and others in recent weeks? Maybe Bob, start with you.
Well, it's probably a little bit of both, Doug. I think, first of all, let's face it, back in the election of last year, there was an attack on the elites. And of course, the elites are described usually as those with more education than others. And I'm sure, without a doubt, that finds its way into Congress. It certainly finds its way into something like the Freedom Caucus and certain folks in the U.S. Senate. But having said that, I think their immediate problem now goes back to what you said earlier. They're trying to find the bucks. They're trying to find a way to slash and burn the funding in some way that they can provide corporate welfare for their friends. And I think really that's what's driving them right now. And until we make our voices heard, and Peter and his colleagues have done an excellent job of that, and until we get our own senators and congressmen fully educated on the subject, I think we're in for a tough road. And it's not over, of course. There's going to be all kinds of things happening here in the next few days.
Anna Maria?
Yeah, I've actually been looking at some of the polling data, and what's interesting is during the same period, we saw very similar drops in confidence in newspapers, TV news, Congress, and the Supreme Court. So it's not just higher education that is suffering this drop of confidence. And it really started about 2 years ago. I mean, if you look from 2010 through 2015, it's pretty steady, and it was in 2015 that we really see the drop, same way in terms of these other institutions. And I view it as even more pernicious than you do. It's more than just the elites. It really is an attack and a lack of confidence in the very basic structures of our democracy. You can't trust news. You have so-called judges. People of certain ethnicities can't be judges. You can't trust them to be, in essence, objective. And I think that's a lot of what's happening with universities. There's this sense, and there are differences between Democrats and Republicans, or Democrats and leaning Democrats, Republicans and leaning Republicans. And amongst the Republicans, it absolutely is tied, the research shows, to this notion that we're politicized, that we're not teaching knowledge in a objective manner, in a way that isn't politicized. And I think that that really is something that we do have to grapple with, because I can explain 10,000 ways why it's not true, but the fact that the perception is there does become a problem for us.
Right. The Republican questioning was a lot on ideology. The Democratic questioning, to the extent there had been any decline, was more around costs and pricing.
Exactly.
President Davenport, how do you look at this set of issues?
I'm at an institution that talks a lot about athletics and quotes a lot of people who offer some strategies, and it strikes me that this is an issue that is more akin to, if you see an open shot, take it. And I think that we are fair game. I think that there's a piling on. I think that there is an audience receptive to the idea that any of the things that we hold dear and know that are fundamental to our work probably deserve less funding right now. I see it as more ideological than I do as financial. I see it as an opportunity to take that shot, because, I mean, look at the Pew findings. That there was a panel on that earlier today. Certainly a very partisan difference in the value of education. And I think when you have the votes and you think that there is an opportunity to get that kind of support, you see that opening and you take it. And it strikes me that that's part of that same path right now.
Michael, you talked on our prep call about sort of not necessarily seeing evidence of sort of some of these national numbers in your local dealings. Is that fair to say?
So I think we all know and see the same thing. I mean, we all could sit here and say exactly what we all would sit here and say, because we all see it every day and we feel it. We see the attacks and how they are focused. We see the easy shot that is set up. If you looked at the tax bill, there were things in there that would save thousands of dollars for the country. I mean, tiny little things, but they were targets, and they deserved actual print in the bill. Let's cut this minimal thing. And that doesn't happen because someone thinks it's a good idea. That happens because someone thinks that there's a group of angry people that they can throw some crumbs to and get excited about. Aha, we got him, we got a lick on him. So I think we see that as happening. And the thing that we talked about in the call, and that we all here see, is that we could talk to those people who would line up these policies and procedures and say, you're not doing a good job. And they'd tell us that, and then minutes later, they'd have their hand around our shoulders saying, gee, I'd like my son or daughter to come to your institution. We'll chuckle, but you know it's true. And so I think there's a lot of duplicitousness going on here. And so we, but I would go to Anna Marie's comments. The fact that we can identify or categorize these things doesn't mean that they're not true and that they're not an issue for us. But I think that we see them, and we know that this is a part of the pablum that's being stirred and fed today, and it's something we have to work with.
Well, that's a perfect segue to my next question, which is, of the factors that sort of are broadly laid out as partially responsible or potentially responsible for this declining confidence, concerns about affordability and value, perceived liberal bias and lack of free speech, underrepresentation of low-income students, and questions about sort of the quality education and job preparedness. I guess I'd ask, which of these do you consider to be most are responsible for the declining public confidence, and which of them, per the point you just made, Michael, which of them are actually the most significant problems, putting aside what's just rhetoric? What do you which of those four or others do you consider to be the most significant problems that higher education sort of really needs to confront and address legitimately?
I think it's all rhetoric, but I'll tell you what I think is important within the rhetoric. I think that among the things that we have done as a community I think where we've been a part of the problem more than we'd like to admit is in the income inequality that we see in the country. And I mentioned the way that people speak and the way that they behave, and I think when I say people, I mean all of us too. We kind of say one thing and mean another. I say always when people say what's political correctness, I say it's how I talk when I'm in Washington. So that was supposed to be funnier than that, but okay, I'll let that go.
They laugh harder when you tell them.
But one of the things that we do is that we create this opportunity for people to be more broadly participating in our society and to get a great education and do a lot. But we have criteria for entry and criteria for success that can be traced back to things like rental income when you were 5 years old, and things that we see as quality that are associated more with how you grew up or who you knew than how brilliant or hardworking or intelligent, whatever those things are, you are. And so I think one of the things that we are doing a better job of, but I think we need to do a better job, is to really look broadly at what it means to have access to our institutions, and then once people arrive at our institutions, to do things that allow them to be successful. I'll be brief, but we can look at the barriers to entry that we have, and stronger, better performing high schools make you more likely to be able to go to college than not, okay? But once you get to us, barrier courses that we have, when you come in as a first-year student, either can take you and accelerate you forward and make it feel like you don't belong. And I think we have to really work on that and how we create opportunity and how we nurture students through our universities.
Yeah, I think that I don't disagree with you. There's a lot of things that we can do better. But I honestly think that the perception, all those things that you talked about, I think that partly people's perceptions of universities come largely from elite private universities. That is what they think of, despite the fact that over 70% of students get their bachelor's degrees at publics. I mean, all the things that you talked about, high price of tuition. We've done some surveys, and people think that our tuition is $30,000 a year. It's $12,000 a year. In the last 2 years, it's actually been cut. We have 10,000 students at our university who are not paying any tuition at all. About 30% of our in-state students pay no tuition. In terms of debt, most of the debt actually comes from the for-profits. If you look at our students' ability half of our students graduate without any debt at all. And the other half that do, it's about $20,000 at the end of getting their degree. I think that we have to fight against these perceptions are out there, but I actually don't think it's the fact for the bulk of our public universities. And part of what we have to do, yes, there's a lot of things that we can do better, and we should fight to do them better. I mean, the barriers are still there. We can do more for all of those things. But I think it's also important to fight the perception, which in fact I don't think is accurate.
Doug, there's an old saw, everybody hates Congress, but everybody loves their congressman. And when I look at all this polling that says we're so bad off, I have to wonder if it's not about something like a tuition label that may be correct or incorrect. But the interesting thing, if we went right down this list here and talked to each of us about what's going on back on our campuses, I think we're probably going to tell stories of increasing numbers of students coming to us, increasing confidence that most parents have anyway in the quality of the education they're pursuing. So again, going back to my point, is it that everybody hates Congress, loves their congressman, everybody hates some of these labels that have been thrown their way, but loves their institution of higher learning?
But I think there is a reality that what we have to offer and what we aspire to for everyone is not attainable. I live in a state where $12,000 is not attainable for many of the people, and they see that opportunity as having those barriers that Michael talks about. And I think that there is a reality that we have to address, and it is an issue of accessibility. And 30% of our students are Pell eligible students, and I'm exceedingly proud of that. And we get $30 million from the state for our Hope Scholarship, which is probably low compared to larger states. But the reality is that there are many people who still cannot afford, and I think it's we know that. It's a growing disparity between those who can afford and cannot afford, and that's even for public institution as well. So our obligations and our challenges and our aspirations need to be aligned in ways that access is a reality for larger numbers of people.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with your overall point, although I would push back. I think they're especially among sort of highly selective publics. Some of the data that have come out in the last few months about the extent to which they are engines of socioeconomic equity, I think, have been damaging, and I think there are public institutions that are certainly need work on that. I guess to me, in the last 2 years, I think that the biggest change we've seen in the last 2 years, per the polling you pointed out, was I believe around the set of questions around how students are, the perception that the campuses are increasingly liberal enclaves, and that set of questions I think have become pretty real, don't you think?
Absolutely, but I do think, just this week I wrote a letter to every single principal of every single public school, public high school in our state, telling them about our Husky Promise and the fact that if they were Pell eligible, they would pay no tuition. Most people don't know how much we're doing. Again, we can do more. We should do more. But I also think that there's a message to get out, and that's why these letters went out.
I totally understood. On this whole on this sort of free press or free speech issue, we've seen, again, some more national data of late sort of suggesting that a lot of students understand the principle and support the principle of the First Amendment, but when you push them a little harder about what that actually means, a lot less support or a lot more willingness to suppress speech that they don't agree with. And I guess I want to get a sense of whether you're seeing that on your campuses and what you as leaders feel that your institutions can do about that. Can you maybe start there, Beverly?
I think that's a lot of issues that, should I defer to my colleague from the University of Virginia? I think we have a generation of we all know this. We have a generation of students that are not communicatively competent. Like us, they walk around on their phones, they don't date one-on-one, they go in groups, they don't talk nearly as much as we do. I don't think they know how to debate. I think we have an obligation. At the University of Tennessee, we are requiring oral argument as a course that all of our students are going to take. I wanted to be a debate course. I'm a communication professor, so I'll tell you my bias coming in. But I don't think our students have the competence and the abilities to debate these really big issues. I mean, you look at some of the complicated issues that these speakers are bringing to our campus that's causing this kind of tension. Are they equipped to make the argument against something that they don't believe in? It's easier to be physical about it. It's easier to be irrational about it. I think we have an obligation to teach better, to teach more, to hold fora, to hold sessions where we are holding our students accountable for what counts as evidence in an argument, to get them with people who are different so that they know, even though they might not agree on that particular viewpoint. I like what Regina said in so many ways, and I think not the least of which is that, well, maybe we are terrified, but that we must change. I think we have to change how we do what we do on our campuses and what we expect of our students. We expect oral communication competencies, but we make them write all the time, and we put them in huge classes where they don't have those opportunities. So this issue about free speech, I thought I knew a lot about the First Amendment until the last couple of years, and that's turned everything upside down. But I think it It's one of those disruptions that makes us, it better make us rethink how we deliver and how we expect and what we expect our students to be able to do. Thank you. Thank you.
Michael, tens of thousands of students on the Ohio State campus, many thousands. Do you believe that the sort of are what we're seeing in an epidemic of lack of understanding of free speech, or do you think it's highly selective?
You know, I think there's a generational change, kind of a modest, subtle but profound generational change. I was having lunch with students a few days ago, and we talked about this. And I taught at my prior institution, I taught a class for years, a seminar. And the seminar was civil rights, the Supreme Court, and the music of the civil rights era. And we would talk about those things. And my co-teacher was Irvin Chemerinsky, and now Dean of the College of Law at Berkeley. And he and Howard Gilman, who succeeded me at Irvine, have written a book just recently on free speech. There's an interesting sea change, slight sea change. So what I will call our generation, an older generation, we came up at a time when the government broadly, the powers that be were suppressing speech from certain points of the political map. And so free speech really was a push. I grew up in Northern California, so near Berkeley, and the free speech movement was a big part of pushing over to be able to allow people to say what they wanted, how they wanted it, when they wanted it, et cetera. So the younger people were pushing hard against the older establishment to allow there to be more speech and more varied speech. So that was what free speech meant, and we were all for it. This generation, again, the students I talked to just this week, they think that free speech is a good thing, but they also think that hurt speech and hate speech and bullying and saying things that are mean and that's not okay. And so they believe in actually limiting speech that is hurtful and painful and limiting. And so a lot of their worry about speech, it seems, comes from that point of view, and it's slight but a different place than we came from, and so they would tend to be for limiting speech more than we were in our generation, although just by a slight amount.
Right. Do you think that's, do you agree with that analysis, and do you think there's something that people can be taught? Is it more history we need, or is it more understanding of who's been protected by free speech in the past?
Well, I certainly think that most of the students, I mean, I still am shocked that our freshmen next year, the traditionally aged freshmen, will have been born in the year 2000. You know, and they have grown up largely under where, in fact, the speech to be protected is pretty hateful speech in many cases. I don't believe in a definition of hate speech, but when you look at the so-called free speech heroes, the Milos that we saw, you know, it's not like they're out there making reasoned arguments. If you've ever heard him, it's, you know, a bunch of epithets by and large. But, you know, I hate to say, you know, perception versus reality again, but, you know, everyone has seen that, you know, the thing at Berkeley where he wasn't allowed to speak. 2 days before, he did speak at the University of Washington. He did speak. We had about 200 policemen there, and at some point, there were people there, people entered, et cetera. At some point, it got stopped, but it got stopped not by our students. And like I say, the speech went on inside. It got stopped by Antifa, who were other people in the community that were not our students. And in fact, someone got shot who was a member of Antifa. But he spoke on our campus 2 days before. Yet what you see again and again is how he didn't speak at Berkeley. And so, you know, I mean, again, you know, we tend to see these, in some cases, you know, when you look at people shutting down someone like a Charles Murray, I truly am appalled. But, you know, these are incidences here and there. And we've also seen lots of incidences where you've got conservative speakers that have been able to speak. Now, having said that all, I think it really is that the whole notion of hate speech is something that we do have to be examining very carefully. And when is it okay and when is it? Some of the speech, in fact, would not be allowed in our classrooms. because we have, rules about discriminatory speech. And if you hear these guys, there's no question as to what they're talking about. And so I think it is confusing to students. Oh, I can't say that in the classroom, but you've invited this person who's saying it on a big stage here. And I think that, I think there are lots of things to unpack with our students. We are having lots of conversations on our campus. We've got speakers coming in to talk about free speech. And I think there's lots to unpack, but the notion that somehow this comes because these are snowflakes or these are silly students, it makes total sense to me that they would think this should not be allowed.
Bob.
I have seen students, and again, this is empirical evidence, but I've certainly heard students who have narrowed the definition of free speech. And if you read the chapter that the Dean of Berkeley Law wrote that we had an opportunity to see, there's no question that we have students that simply have narrowed that. I guess I could call this the solution, the Full Employment Act for political scientists. Perhaps, just perhaps, and we're going to explore this on our campus, just perhaps somewhere along the line as we have reformed over and over again our core curriculums and our foundations classes and our orientation sessions, maybe somewhere along the way we tossed out the focus on the First Amendment, the focus on constitutional government, the focus on what it means to be an American and to be able to debate civilly on a campus. And again, I'm not suggesting it's a bromide for the entire problem, but I suspect that if we look through that curriculum, we'll probably find a few examples that could stand some reform.
Yeah, I've certainly had it posited to me that that civics have largely been dropped from the K-12 curriculum in a lot of places. So it may be that there's some corrective action.
A little factoid that I picked up somewhere along the line when I was reading is that the majority of universities that offer a major in history, you don't have to take one course on American history.
Yeah.
And I think that we have neglected that teaching.
Yeah.
Maybe a tiny factoid as well, which is when I have these, and I think many of us, when we've had these conversations with students, they actually like the conversation, they're fully engaged, and they do it with their eyes and minds open, so they don't push back. It's actually just something they haven't thought of from the direction that we're bringing it. So I think it's been very positive.
So you think there's some real opportunity?
I think it's been very positive.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I do want to go back to, and maybe our, I forget what the number of neurons is, but maybe some of us have been able to fire a few. I'm curious sort of people's reactions to what lessons you think what Regina said might have for your institutions. Did you already start to play with that during her talk?
I'm sorry.
Regina's talk. I'm just wondering where we sort of. I thought she had some very interesting things to say about the speed of innovation. I mean, this isn't higher education is an enterprise that sort of proudly moves somewhat slowly, and it's actually I think there's a lot to be said for that. I'm not sure fast change is what this enterprise necessarily ought to be about, but I do think that the whole set of questions she raised about change at scale and sort of problem-based inquiry, and I thought there was a lot to chew on there, and I guess I'm just curious whether any of you had thoughts you wanted to respond. Do you have some thoughts?
I'm happy to start. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked to serve on a panel, and the person who is managing it has taken several companies public, and she's running a fund of funds, and she's around startup people all the time, and she put up 2 slides and said, here's the university model, and here's the new model. And I leaned over to Michael and said, everything that she said is antithetical to our culture and the way we work. And I think I disrupted him because he was getting ready to go and speak. But what she said is, it stuck with me. She says, in this innovation world, radically transparent, everything is repeatable, exceedingly nimble, everyone works as a team, gets rewarded in that way, and I'm thinking, nothing is repeatable. We were trained and socialized to have a niche and be an individual. We go slowly. We pride ourselves on all the practices. We focus on activity more than we do on impact. We count the numbers of things. And so I just, all those lists just were running through my mind as she was speaking. I'm not sure we like to be terrified. So, I mean, we're pretty comfortable when we're right. We're a bunch of people who were right a lot of times. That's how we got to where we were. So I do think it's a culture that is not the way in which we've grown up and that we have been socializing. So it does need disruption for us to think of a different way of living. I think that's how she started out. Yeah. Discipline really means live differently. Do we know how to live differently, and then are we disciplined enough to try it and sustain it? I thought she was just immensely provocative.
Other people who want to weigh in?
Well, I live in a community that is a tech economy and deal a lot with software engineering firms and a couple of large tech firms that are in town. And there is just no question that there's a significant and dramatic difference between the way they operate, the decisions they make, the conclusions they come to, how long it takes them to get there, and what we do over on our side. And I think along the way, we've tried to learn from that and tried to help our faculty understand that the slower pace that worked for so many years is probably not going to work into the future. And one of the panels this afternoon, the question was, what are we going to do in higher education about the accelerating pace of change? Well, it's a really good question that I think deserves some innovative answers, and I think she did an excellent job of getting us on track thinking about that.
Anna Marie?
I think that, we're always dealing with this balance between those things that are timeless and those things that are timely. And I do think that we have, if you want to call it the luxury in higher education, that we don't have to manage to a bottom line that's on a quarterly basis, and that allows us, right, and that allows us to do basic research that is so important because from it springs so much more. I mean, look at physics. I mean, you can look at something like the laser, which I think is the closest thing to magic, and it wasn't some doctor saying, oh my God, knives are really, fairly barbaric instruments. It came from a physicist trying to touch the face of God. And, we have to balance those things. Now, I do think that disruption is coming. We traditionally in universities have been like an album, that you have to do things in this order, and you got 4 years, and that's how you come out. This is the playlist generation. They don't buy the album. They don't want the B-side. And
the bundled generation.
And I think that there is going to be more dropping in and dropping out. We're finding that with our faculty, with some of our tech faculty. We have to make sure that they can work in industry for a year and then come back or work half-time. And I do think we have to think about doing things differently, in terms of order, et cetera. I mean, when I think about the process that she talked about as being linear, I mean, we all know that that's not how things happen. I like to think of, in many ways, what leads to these big movements forward are serendipity. But I think we can try and build the kinds of environments that give serendipity a push. Who comes together? We're thinking about that in terms of designing buildings. Who are the people inside? Who's going to meet with whom?
Knocking down walls between departments.
Exactly. How can you create those situations that are apt to give that chance a push, make it more likely to happen?
Right. Michael, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I was thinking when I was in medical school, there was a jazz club near where my university was called the Both And. And I don't know what the Both And meant, but I just thought I should tell you that. But there was a jazz club actually called the Both And I'm thinking this is kind of a Both And thing, and that is that well, if I take me as an example again, so I finished school and then joined the faculty, and I was terrified every day. I woke up every day. I've said this 1,000 times. I woke up every day feeling like I had to do something special that day to keep it all moving along. And so I believe in that, being terrified and having to be innovative and to push forward, and that's the case for research careers. And so I think that sounded normal to me. The both and part is that you have to also have a foundation for that. You have to know something. So if I think of the jazz club and the both and, there was lots of innovation going on there because the people were innovating on their songs as a routine thing. They didn't play in the same way twice on purpose, and that was great, and that was part of what was so exciting about it. But they also had to know how to play the instrument first. And so I think a lot of what we do is help people get to the place where they can play the instrument, and then we want to encourage them to go and innovate and make great music.
Do you believe, thinking about sort of the kind of cultures that she was talking about as being necessary, what do you see as the primary impediments to creating those cultures on your institution's campuses?
Well, one of the things that I do think was really important about what she said was about risk and it being the price that you pay for doing something great. I do think that at least the perception and in fact the fact of how hard it is to get into a quote unquote good university and how important it is, because the data doesn't suggest it's anywhere near as important as people think it is. But nonetheless, all of that, I do see these kids who have been, forming the resumes to apply to college, it seems like since they were 10. These kids who are, who basically walk over homeless people in order to do their charity project so they can, put it on their resume. I mean, that kind of programming that, that doesn't leave a lot of room for risk. And so I think a lot of our universities, we've been talking a lot about failing forward. And we've been talking a lot about resilience and about, I told freshmen this year, if you've been here, if you graduate in 4 years and haven't done something where you failed, you have not, been ambitious enough. And I think that, we're beginning to reorient our conversations because I do worry about that fear of failure and that sense that they have to be perfect in order to go into a good school. And if they don't go into a good school, they're not going to have a good life and, yada, yada. And, that partly happens. We have, parents with fewer children, and they're very anxious. They worry about it. We know this is the anxious generation.
Interesting. So you focused, when my question about innovation, focusing sort of on students a little bit. What do you think is the, what about institutional rewards for faculty, for staff, and the societal rewards for institutions? Do you think that those are framed sufficiently to reward innovation?
No, I don't think we have a long hit. We have 200 more years of practices, and we're really good at layering on more of activity. We count activity more than we count impact. We can't even figure out very easily how to jointly appoint a faculty member. That takes a long time we'll have 3 years of a task force on that. And still, I don't know if we do that very well. And how many times are we going to hear a new assistant professor say, I can't engage in that, I don't have tenure yet. I'm so grateful that I grew up in a department where none of us, we're all assistant professors, I think, and I wasn't taught that, but that's more the norm. We are a big bureaucracy that's built on practices, and what do we reward? Do we have enough group rewards? We need more of them, but no, I think structurally, culturally, our values aren't as geared toward being as innovative as we could be. They're not beyond changing, but it will take time.
So I want to shift, well, go ahead.
I was just going to say that there are some perverse incentives out there. I've been very clear with my regents that I don't care about raising the average student GPA incoming. That, that's just not, or the average SAT, that's just not something I'm interested in. And you know what? Our U.S. News and World Report, aren't probably going to go up because you know what? They have perverse incentives, like they give you points for how many students you reject. I think we have to, that we all have to figure out, it's not that I don't believe in metrics and ratings, but we all have to figure out which are the right ones, because right now there's some very perverse incentives that in fact tend to de-incentivize the behavior that we say we really want, which is innovation and risk-taking and impact, not just,
Right. Bob, did you want to jump in here?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I want well, since I want to, I think what I want to try and close, obviously the goal of coming to a conference like this, part of the goal is to be entertained, but also is to sort of walk away with ideas. And so I guess I wanted to give each of the presidents a chance to talk about something that their institution is doing that is sort of moving the needle on some. One of the things I was impressed by Regina's comments was about sort of really goal-focused approaches and really identifying what you want to accomplish. And I guess I wanted to get a sense of sort of a practice or a policy or a program or something each of your institutions has adopted that has moved the needle on a really important institutional goal, or begun to, or that you believe can, and that also could conceivably be a model for others to copy and to draw from? Maybe Bob, start there.
Well, 3 years ago, we created the College of Innovation and Design, and it follows perfectly on what we were just talking about, because what I was going to say when you turned to me, Doug, was that the reward is playing by the rules. We wanted to create a college, degree granting, no departments, that did not play by the rules, and encourage faculty, those who wanted to climb out of their silos, come on over and participate in something that was transdisciplinary in nature, that creates new degrees across colleges and disciplines, and that rewards faculty for that. In the 3 years, we have one degree that's off the ground and running. It's across 3 colleges and 4 disciplines. It's called Games, Interactive Media, and Mobile, and basically it's teaching students virtual reality, augmented reality, and how to use it in the industrial world. It's also partnering with HBX, Harvard Business School's online program. So we offer our students, you didn't get to credentialing today, but we believe strongly in alternative credentialing. And we're working with the Harvard Business School, giving our students 9 hours of online learning in accounting, finance, and management for those liberal arts students who don't have those skills and competencies that these employers are telling us they're taking a second look at these days. So that college has made a huge difference. We were fortunate enough to attract the director of the Harvard Innovation Lab as the first dean. And to be honest about it, that's 90% of the reason why it's working so well. Because Gordon Jones is connected in such a way that he's making this all work for students, for our faculty, and for the university and the employer community.
Anna Mari?
Yeah, I'm going to mention something that's not quite as sexy, but that is really, really important to me. And about 10 years ago, I was a vice provost, and a group of us actually, over a long weekend, put together a program that we call the Husky Promise. It's in its 10th anniversary this year, and we have had more than 40,000 students that have gone through the university tuition free. And I don't just mean like, you know, I'm talking about all 4 years or up to 5 years. And this year we started off in the first year, we had a couple thousand. This year we have more than 10,000 across our 3 campuses. And, you know, I just think that that is really important. We know, in fact, that there's more than just tuition that's an issue in terms of access. The cost of attendance is real. Free college is not the promise, but I also know, I'm a adolescent psychologist, that, you know, a lot, that sticker shock, and sometimes there's a perception of the sticker, is very real. And students, you know, as early as their freshman year, sometimes, you know, in 7th or 8th grade, are beginning to realize, I can't afford to go to college. And so this is a way of taking that away, and I'm extremely proud of it. And it's, you know, very much a meat and potatoes, but a lot of kids have benefited.
The flagship campus in Tennessee attracts what we think are the best and the brightest. We have exceedingly high GPA and ACT average, but when I got there, I heard about something that I'd never heard about any other place, and I think the cumulative effect of a focus on student success does have big impacts. And this is what I saw that I'd never seen. The Haslam College of Business offers a scholarship to single mothers. I think that's a population that I have never seen targeted, but we talk about diversity, and I really am impressed with the diverse set of activities to make this impact. And a second thing that we just have stood up, and it's all of us are concerned about success. We have a Hope Scholarship, like many states. We were a little bit later in coming to this. We know finances is the #1 reason that students leave. We have a third of our students are Pell eligible, about the same number are our first generation. So we've created something called the Bridge Back to Hope, because what we were finding is that more than 37% of the students who had the Hope Scholarship, you know, the best in their high schools, weren't coming back the next year. So bridging back to hope, to me, is important as having that hope scholarship. They get there, but if they can only stay 2 semesters, then we failed. So these small, what might seem like micro kinds of programs, I think, do have the cumulative effect of being a more diverse place and being a place that we have to help everybody thrive and bridge back.
Michael, you'll have the last word.
Great. So one thing I would say is that terrific programs, and actually it'd be wonderful to go with throughout the entire room, because I'm sure everyone has a series of these things that we're all working on together, and that's really one of the nicest things about our segment, is that we put our time and energy into trying to do a better job of creating opportunity for people. And so I wish we had a chance to hear from everyone here about the great things that are going on. I'll mention a couple things that we're doing. Again, they'll be reflective of the things that others are doing. First, actually, like the Husky Promise, I liked the idea of students from the median income and below being able to go to school without tuition. I'll tell you, I had a conversation with an unnamed legislator about this when I first arrived at my current institution, and he frowned a bit. He said, I'm from a low-income background and a lot of low-income people in my community, and I was thinking, yeah, and we want to come together and make this, I'm thinking this, my neurons were firing on this, and he said, and I had to work, and I think I learned a lot about taking on some debt and having some skin in the game, so I don't know if that's a very good idea. And so I had to regroup, and I realized we weren't going to get much help from the state, and so we actually were able to refinance some of the equipment and things we have on our campus and through a leasing program and get an upfront payment, so that next year we'll be able to do that for the students from the state of Ohio using university resources and not needing the state for that. And so I'd love to stay as a partner, but we wanted to make sure to move that way forward. Another thing I'll say that we're doing next year that we're excited about, and we don't know that it's going to work, so we'll see, but we're going to give all of our incoming freshmen and transfer students iPads. And also have some available for the faculty. I had done this before by college, like at a medical school, where you give this to 150 students, and we did that over 4 years. It was a great thing. We'll have to do about 10,000 students a year, and so it's a bigger leap. But we're going to look to see what it's like to have a platform that everyone shares, and that we go year by year, so that in about 2.5 years, everyone on campus will have this platform. We hope to develop new apps. We'll have actually a coding lab and an app development lab on the campus for students, faculty, staff, and people from the community. So we want to see what it feels like to do this. I'll say I do it for my own course. It works great, and we'll see how it works at scale.
Great. We are out of time. The good news is that we're going to go back here, I think, for the reception now. So please join us, and please thank Bob Kustra, Anna Marie Kause, Beverly Davenport, and Michael Drake. Thank you all.